Good morning. Please welcome panel moderator Trevor Hughes.
Hello. Welcome. Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. I want to start with an expression of gratitude. Thank you all for coming out early on the last big day of RSA Conference. I know there's a lot going on, and we're delighted to have you in the room for what I know is going to be a really interesting conversation about some of the most pressing issues across the digital economy globally today. My name is Trevor Hughes. I'm the President and CEO of the IAPP. We are a global professional home for those who work in privacy and data protection and AI governance. And we are joined today by a panel that is made up of some of the top experts, top voices in the world on those issues. So I'm going to start to my immediate left and do some quick introductions, and then we're going to dive right in. First of all, we have Barbara Cosgrove. Barbara Cosgrove is the Chief Privacy Officer at Workday. Many of you should know Workday as a global provider of enterprise HR and financial services. Next to Barbara is Ruby Zeffo, who is the Chief Privacy Officer at Uber. Next, we have Emma Redmond, who is Associate General Counsel and also Head of Privacy and Data Protection for OpenAI. Emma also serves on the AI Advisory Council for the Irish government. And then last but certainly not least, at the end of our panel here, we have Anu Talus. Anu Talus is the Commissioner of the Finnish Data Protection Authority. And while that is an incredibly important role, Anu also serves as the chair of the European Data Protection Board. For those of you in the audience who don't know, the EDPB, as we like to call it by its acronym, is the convening organization for all of the data protection authorities in Europe. So all of the data protection authorities responsible for enforcing GDPR and other data protection standards across Europe, they come together within the European Union and are chaired by Anu Talus. And in that way, I don't think it's overstating it to say she is the preeminent data protection regulator in the entire world, given the influence of the GDPR. So panel, welcome. It's great to have you here today. And why don't we dive right in? The broad topic of our panel is AI and AI governance and the emerging legal standards that we know are applicable to AI. We're going to talk about some of the risks, some of the challenges, but we're going to start with the EU AI Act. Many of you will have heard of the AI Act. It passed EU Parliament in March, and there are a few procedural things that it has to jump through before it is in its final stage, and that should happen this month. But I'm going to turn right to Emma, working at OpenAI and on the ground in Dublin in Ireland. Emma, tell us where we are with the AI Act and what we might expect next.
Super. Thanks, Trevor, and thanks so much for having me here today. What an honor. So I think many of us will remember where we were when the AI Act was approved. I certainly remember where I was, a little bit like the time when the GDPR was approved. I was ironically in the States on both occasions, and it was interesting to see the reactions from both sides of the water in relation to it. So look, in terms of the Act itself, overwhelmingly approved by, I think, 526 votes to, or 523 votes to 46, I think. So you can really see that endorsement there as regards the Act. And it heralded, of course, the arrival of, I suppose, the first globally significant attempt to apply a regulatory framework to artificial intelligence. And that can't be underestimated in terms of what that was trying to achieve. But I suppose there's always a thought about moving to the next step. Let's go to implementation. But we have to maybe step back a little bit, because there is like a phased approach with respect to the Act. So folks can quickly move on to this notion of governance. But we do have to kind of take that step back a little bit As we know, it's going to likely be published in June in the official journal, perhaps, and then it takes effect in stages later. And you'll see that there's various implementation stages when it comes to codes of practice and banned, prohibited practices and things like that. So there's definitely some housekeeping that still has to happen with respect to the AI Act. But I think what's interesting about it is just seeing how it's going to evolve and the guidance and clarification that will come over time with respect to the AI Act. Like any piece of legislation, it does need that clarification and a bit of a North Star. So I think we're going to see that over time, which is going to be very helpful. So all to say, not to take the AI Act in and of itself. You always have to look at it in the whole with plenty of guidance and clarification that will be coming out from lots of, if I point to the codes of conduct, for example, which will be one of the areas that has a big focus under the AI Act. And so I think that's incumbent on lots of companies to really partake in that, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. I think there's more information that will come out with respect to general purpose AI and systemic risks and so on. So there is a rush to kind of move ahead to implementation and make it happen. Well, it's important to take a step back and see it in the whole with respect to other codes and guidance, et cetera, that will come our way. So
excellent. So let's recap. The AI Act has passed. It's passed overwhelmingly. There's enormous political support for it within the European Union. A little bit of housekeeping needs to be done, but we'll have a final version in the coming weeks. But then it will take some time for it to fully roll out. There are effective dates, 6 months, 18 months that stretch out, and a number of things that will be added on to the AI Act, codes of conduct, interpretation, and other things. But we do have the Act itself, and this is the first major piece of legislation globally that really does give us a framework to manage from. I think one of the things that's been interesting in AI governance for the past few years is that we've really lacked a single comprehensive framework. And if you go out and look for AI governance frameworks, you could find dozens, hundreds even, and it's hard to know which one you should follow. I actually think this might be tremendously influential. The AI Act, like the GDPR before it, will likely have enormous global influence. So Anu, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. What will be the influence of the AI Act? What's the significance of it, certainly within the European Union, but even more globally? Is this going to be a policy leadership moment for the European Union in setting a global framework for AI governance?
Well, the countries and the international organizations which are looking at the AI at the moment, well, we share common values. So it is quite natural, quite normal that our work influences each other. So I do think that the EU AI Act is likely to have a very broad impact. It is, like you said, the world's first comprehensive AI law. So I think that it is very much like when GDPR entered into force. It will probably be, there is probably a very close attention how it will be implemented and what type of impact it will have. So very much as was the case with the GDPR in 2018 and the years after that. So I do think that it's normal that the text like the EU AI Act has influence beyond the Europe, and I don't think that that's disproportionate. I actually see that it is a very pragmatic consequence of the fact that EU is a very large consumer market with over 450 million consumers. So for me, this is a very pragmatic consequence here. It is actually a quite big achievement from EU that we've been able to put together a piece of legislation, drawing up harmonized rules for 27 different member states. So if a company wants to make business in EU, it will have to respect the rules which protect consumers and protect fundamental rights and create a level playing field for the businesses.
Excellent. So clearly, nature abhors a vacuum, and I think innovative technology and risk environments abhor a lack of policy, a policy vacuum. And into that policy vacuum, which we have had, this is really the first major act, we now have the EU AI Act that has filled the space quickly, and as a result, it will inevitably be influential. Barbara, let's take this down to a tactical level. Let's talk about what does the EU AI Act mean for organizations that are operating globally, clearly human resources, financial management within organizations. There are likely many AI use cases within those scenarios. We certainly have seen some of them in the marketplace already. Tell us about Workday and how you're approaching this issue and how the EU AI Act is kind of guiding the structures, the frameworks, the responses that you're creating.
Sure. So we've been on our AI governance journey for some time now, setting the framework for how we would be able to achieve compliance as the EU AI Act came out. And if we think about good AI governance, good AI risk management at Workday, we think about it in terms of having principles, practices, and people. I think those are the easiest ways to bucket it. And so from a principles level, it's thinking about, from an executive level, what is your company going to commit to? What is the North Star? Not necessarily what do you have to do for compliance purposes, but what does your company think is the right thing to do? Not to build AI just because you can build it, but what are your use cases? For us, we have amplifying, it's all human-centered at Workday. So amplifying human potential, positively impacting society, championing transparency and fairness, and delivering on our privacy and security commitments. And those lay out the overall, like at the product ideation level, should we build this? Is it the right thing to build? But then as we get more into the compliance aspects of it, we look at the next side, our processes. And that's where we've built off of those principles a set of responsible AI guidelines and standards that really get more into the weeds of how we build, how we guide the workforce, how we guide our developers. And that's where we've been trying to bake the EU AI Act into those standards, into those guidelines along the way. Now, that being said, we know we have work streams going on now because it's something that we're going to continually have to reiterate, but we have the base guidelines that we're able to go back and look and see, do we believe this will achieve compliance? As more guidance come out or as we see more global regulations come out, where do we need to update them? What do we need to do? And over the years, we've leveraged the NIST AI risk management framework a lot in how we've built out those guidelines. But these are practical standards that we hand to our developers in the roadmap. And then the people aspect is really making sure that we have executive buy-in. We have a cross-functional responsible AI steering committee. And that we've made sure that as part of that, we have a governance representation on it and a products and technology. So it has our general counsel, it has our chief responsible AI officer, it has our chief diversity officer, but it also has our chief product officer, our chief technology officer. And so they can be reviewing all of these guidelines. We can make sure that we have buy-in across the company. And then as we have product decisions need to be made, it can go there to have the conversations as well. And along that way, we're making sure we're doing training across the workforce over and over again, because things are quickly changing. And it's not waiting to do the annual type of training just with a code of conduct on an annual basis or an annual privacy. It's as things shift, we use our own product for learning. We'll put out a data sheet. We'll put out our new facts and have everybody acknowledge that they're up to speed in terms of what we expect and how we do things, because we know this is a quickly changing environment. So having those processes in place, I think, have built a good framework to enable compliance, but understanding that we're still watching as more guidelines come in terms of how to achieve it.
So I want to capture three things that Barbara shared because I think they're really important. First of all, your organization should probably start with your own principles. What matters to your organization, and that is going to help you guide your organizational behavior. And then things like the AI Act and other standards, which are inevitable, plug into that broader principles framework. And you may have to derogate a bit, or you may have to add on or adjust, but at least you've started from your own baseline of what's important. Second, it takes a village inside an organization, that this is not a point solution inside the organization. There's lots of stakeholders that sit around the table. And certainly with AI, with the breadth of applications that we see across the enterprise, there are many, many voices that need to be at the table. And then finally, the upskilling and training is absolutely critical. And that's not just for those people sitting around the table. That's probably the whole enterprise. You know, when I think of, even at the IEPP, the junior staffers that are finding AI tools in some of the service providers that we have across marketing platforms, HR platforms, and other things, there's lots of AI out there that junior staffers are also touching, and making sure that they know what they're doing is a good thing. So 3 big lessons, I think, from Workday, which are really valuable. Principles, it takes a village, and you got to train everybody all the time. Ruby, what does AI governance, good AI governance, look like at Uber?
Well, first I want to distinguish what I consider traditional machine learning from Gen AI, right?
Okay.
The darling everybody's talking about, that's not where I spend most of my time. So I spend most of my time on traditional machine learning, which is where you are actually specially training algorithms and models to do something. We do have Gen AI Steerco I'm on, and we have special guidelines for those tools and how to use them, but that's honestly not what keeps me up at night. Uber has a long run on machine learning. It's how we enable our mission and how we enable the marketplace and our mobility and delivery services at scale. And that also means that those services have to be adaptable in real time, whether it's the weather or increased demand. And so doing that helps people have a better user experience, and also helps safety too. Like, you know, we're improving marketplace efficiency so the matching works better, or we're doing ID verification for safety purposes, or we're doing personalized recommendations in your Eats app so that you don't get foods you don't like. So that's what I'm talking about. And that's a more complicated issue. So we approached that much like privacy, which is a programmatic risk-based system, right? And it's got to have some way of evaluating those models, much like privacy impact assessments. And the best way to do that is to embed them into systems you already have. Nobody wants yet another evaluation system. And so like the PIA system is embedded in our product and engineering development processes, so is model analysis.
Got it.
Yeah, that makes it more efficient, and you can also sort of repurpose people. And much like Barbara said, what we've been doing is just revising the questionnaire we use and the analysis of that as time goes on. And so most recently, we've, you know, kind of used NIST's framework as a, I will call it a checklist for did we forget anything, right?
Yep.
So that's sort of the heart of what we do. And then, of course, we have governance processes, too. But by the way, we also do some fairness, which is sort of attendant to that, to make sure that we are addressing any kind of bias or disparate impact. And then human review is also very important, particularly if someone might possibly lose access to the platform. But the governance portion, several years ago, I actually just started an executive cross-functional council. Nobody else is doing it, so I said, I'll do it. This is how CPOs get involved, right?
Yeah,
We're just
exactly.
willing to roll up our sleeves and do things. And I think people might have been afraid of what would happen if they didn't join. I don't really know, but they were very enthusiastic participants. And then we also have, obviously, our internal audit department, our audit committee, our full board. And unlike many companies, we actually did a full civil rights, third-party civil rights assessment last year that has both privacy and AI recommendations. And we have a special team addressing those who pull in specialists like me as needed.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to capture a few things that Ruby has said, too, because I think they're really helpful. She reinforced the idea that it takes a village. There's a council at Uber. I think that is a model that we're seeing emerge in many organizations, that it doesn't sit in just one place. AI governance is an enterprise-wide function. However, you don't have to build something new. That there are governance structures that are already in place, particularly with privacy and data protection, that you can leverage. And why build an entire new thing when you've already got operational governance structures that can help you? So your privacy impact assessment, you can extend that into a human rights impact assessment, an AI impact assessment, even sometimes a fairness or bias impact assessment. Those tools are really valuable. Another thing I want to capture, and this is a developing space that I think we will see more of, but I think it is nascent at this moment, is third-party external assessments on these things. Some of the fairness and bias issues, some of the transparency issues around AI, algorithmic transparency is notoriously complicated and difficult. Fairness and bias are notoriously complicated and difficult. External review and maybe even audit is a direction that many are discussing we are headed towards. And so Uber is early in that space doing third-party assessments. Emma, OpenAI clearly is in the center of all of this. And it's hard to even talk about generative AI in the world today without hearing about OpenAI and ChatGPT, many of the products and the leadership from OpenAI. How do you see OpenAI's role in helping organizations navigate the good and safe use of the technologies, the tools that your company is providing?
Yeah, so I think what's helpful here is to put kind of who we are in context and where we came from. And it's OpenAI as a research lab, and that's how we're founded. And I suppose because we have amazing researchers, they had inbuilt mindset in terms of how you approach safety and risk. And you know, we very much take a layered approach with respect to how you know, we deploy responsible and safe AI. And I think that mindset is very, very important to us because that's how it always worked. That's how we approached issues, where we have these amazing researchers doing their studies and analysis, and which we've written about. You know, our system cards are out there, publicly available. I always say it's great nighttime reading if you want to download them and have a read. But you can see that mindset was always there, and so we ensure that you know, was built into our tools and that which we make available to customers. So, you know, we do have those tools available there for our users, and you know, obviously our usage policies exist, and there's enforcement there and monitoring with respect to those usage policies. But it's also, I suppose, really the inbuilt practices and processes that we have. So the from you know, data collection at the beginning to alignment during training, through post-training. We have our red teamers, we have our preparedness framework. Our red teamers are amazing, originally very much an internal team, but now actually opening that up wider to external red teamers who have real domain expertise, who can bring that in. And so it's very, very vast and it's very broad, and that you know, process and procedure that we're creating, we're able to pass that on, obviously, you know, for our users, which is fantastic. I think you know, we can talk about. Sorry, we also have public commitments with respect to that in terms of the White House commitments, obviously, as well. But what's also important, and it was highlighted already in terms of what we can take based on what's been done already. So if I take, you know, GDPR, and you take the concept of privacy by design, you can really take that and bring it to the fore again, and add that to your red teamers, add that to your preparedness framework, where you're really trying to assess and see what's coming down the tracks. It's a beautiful mix together, I will say, and it's a privilege for me to be a part of it. So that privacy by design aspect is very, very important. Obviously, I have this phrase, you know, you build in, not on. You know, it has to be in at the beginning and not kind of retrofitted at the end. And so I think all of those together, as I say, are a lovely mix. But I think that research concept is very, very important. And we're able to take that and bring that forward in terms of the tools that are available to users.
Fantastic.
So
back in 1999, Larry Lessig, Harvard Law professor, wrote the book Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace. And he posited the idea, the thesis, and I think it's right, that baked within technology is policy. Code is law. And I think what we hear Emma saying is that we should look to these technologies that we are using for some of the guardrails to help manage and mitigate risk as well. So I would take one big message here from OpenAI, and that is ask of the tools that you are implementing, what are the guardrails? What are the protections? How can we utilize them? What should we know about this technology in terms of how it is managing risk itself before we bring it into our enterprise? Paying attention to those tools you're bringing in is absolutely important. Anu, let's talk about the teeth to all of this. The EU AI Act, maybe notoriously, has a maximum fine of 7%. And I'm just going to note that the GDPR has a maximum fine of 4% of global turnover. And when I say global turnover, that means global revenue. And so for many organizations, that's massive. That is absolutely massive. And so GDPR was set at 4% as a maximum fine of global turnover. EU AI Act is almost double that amount for a maximum fine. I'm wondering if EU Parliament is sending a message about the perceived risk of AI in the global digital marketplace with this. And then I'd also really be interested in hearing you share with us, what does enforcement look like in European institutions? How is that going to occur at a member state level, at an EU institution level? What is enforcement going to look like?
Well, to start with the 7% fines, it is indeed a very significant deterrent, but we must put that in a broader perspective. So to start with, setting fines as a percentage of businesses' turnover, this is a very common practice in EU law. So this is also the way to make the legislation time-proof. Secondly, the 7% is actually not, it's not exceptional, and it's not new. Already in 2000, the competition law did set maximum fines for 10%. And then, as a third point, the 7% applies only to certain very risky situations. So it applies only to cases where the AI implementations are actually forbidden. So this could be, for example, social scoring, or then it could be recognizing emotions in school or at working place. So these are the situations where the use of AI could actually cause really serious consequences. But then, if you are looking at the other cases, other situations, actually, well, for example, for failing to provide all requested information, the administrative fines are set to 3%. So this is actually lower than what is the ceiling in the GDPR, where we have the 4% ceiling, as you said. Then moving on to the framework, how we will put it all together up well, on EU level and then also at member states level. First, I think that we should not forget that we actually already have a law, a regulation, which also applies to AI. We have the GDPR. So when the AI systems involve processing of personal data, which is very often the case, the GDPR applies. So the AI Act is building on a GDPR, the existing regulation. How this will then be enforced in EU, it is for the member states to decide who will be the regulator for the AI Act at member state level. In some cases, this might be the data protection authorities. In some other cases, it might be some other regulator. Regardless of the solution at the member state level, it is necessary that there will be a strong cooperation between the data protection authorities and the enforcers of the AI Act. So in any case, the data protection authorities will continue to play a significant role when it comes to enforcing the AI Act.
Fantastic. So one thing to capture from the AI Act, and Anu has mentioned it here, is that it is a risk-based policy tool. And those higher level fines are going to be applicable to high-risk activities with AI. So you should look very carefully at the AI Act and see where your usage of AI may fall, and certainly be very, very aware if you are in social scoring, human resource type circumstances in which it is characterized as a higher risk category. Okay, we're going to play a game now. So the EU AI Act is the first major policy instrument in AI governance that we've seen around the world, but there inevitably will be others. And while the US is always, it seems, a bit behind the rest of the world in passing major digital policy legislation, I want you to help us predict, and audience, you're going to help us as well, predict when we might see national AI governance legislation in the United States. So we're all going to hold our hands out like this. Hold your hand out like this. Here we go. And I'm going to say a year, and when you think AI legislation is going to pass, you're going to go thumbs up and hold it up a bit so we can see in the room sort of an informal analog poll. And panelists, you have to play as well. You have to play my game. So hold your hand out. 2024, who thinks we're going to see AI legislation in the United States? Yeah, I agree. No, not happening. Yeah, not this year. 2025? Ooh, we already have some people optimistic about it. 2026? Okay, more? No panelists yet.
Oh, I did 20.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay,
For
Barbara,
state,
sorry.
for
Yeah,
state,
keep your
right?
thumb up, keep your thumb up. 2027 and 2028. Okay, I think there's a reasonable number of people that think it's possible, a majority of people in the room think it's possible that we will see AI governance, AI ethics legislation in the United States at a national level within the next 4 years. That's notable. You should be paying attention to the legislative environment in the US, globally. I would also note that we're already seeing state-level activity in the US, and there are laws both introduced and in the process of being passed at a state level, and that very often is a catalyst in the United States towards federal activity. So watch state activity, watch federal activity around AI ethics. All right, let's turn now to privacy. The panel was largely built on AI governance, but a lot has been happening in privacy, and as Anu has mentioned, GDPR affects AI governance as well. In the form of automated decision-making standards within the GDPR itself, but also data protection and privacy makes up an enormous amount of the governance that needs to be done in AI anyway. So I think it's appropriate for us to explore what's happening globally right now on privacy. Back in 2020, in January of 2020, Gartner, the big research firm, estimated that 10% of the world's population was subject to national privacy legislation. And that did include the European Union, included Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, all sorts of countries around the world, but it was only 10% of the world's population. The IEPP recently did some research, just this year, in fact, and we estimated that early this year, just 4 years after Gartner's research, that 79% of the world's population is now subject to national privacy legislation. So in 4 short years, basically throughout the pandemic, all of those privacy policymakers were very active on Zoom and other places, passing privacy laws around the world. Almost 70% of the world's population had a brand new privacy law put in place. That is an enormous amount of policy activity. It's an enormous amount of change. And we should note that the one major jurisdiction, the largest economy in the world, the largest technology exporter in the world, the only member of the G7 and the only member of the G20 to not have national privacy legislation is, panel, help me, who is it? It's the United States, of course, right? It's the US. So Barbara, let me turn to you. What gives? What is going on in the United States that we don't have national privacy legislation after all of these years?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The U.S. is in a unique situation. I mean, that being said, we have a long history of having privacy coverage in the U.S., a sectoral approach. We've had HIPAA for years covering health personal information. We've had Gramm-Leach-Bliley covering consumer financial information. Don't hold me to this number, but I think we now have 18 states. It's changing daily, 17, 18.
Minnesota is the next one.
Yeah, it's changing quickly, that have put in place comprehensive privacy protections. So that's more than 150 million Americans that are now covered. And we have no shortage of privacy enforcers at a state and federal level in the US, including the Federal Trade Commission. But that being said, we don't have federal privacy legislation. And now with AI and so much data-fueled innovation, it's really demonstrating the need for having that at the basis of comprehensive privacy framework at the basis of any of the AI legislation. But we are seeing, agreement in Washington that it's needed, bipartisan agreement that it's needed. And, Workday has always been a supporter of federal privacy reform. And we're optimistic that we're going to see change in the US, whether it's at the federal or the continual state level.
Okay. I think we should also note, and this is a striking statistic for me, that one agency with limited jurisdiction in the United States, the Federal Trade Commission, has actually issued a higher dollar amount in fines than all of the GDPR fines totaled. So the Federal Trade Commission has issued over $6 billion in fines, and GDPR fines don't total that amount yet. So we do have activity. There is risk, for sure, and there are regulatory standards at the state and federal level, sectoral in the US. But Anu, tell us, I'm sure it would be a welcome development were the US to pass comprehensive national privacy legislation. From a European perspective, I have to imagine there would be a degree of, well, a welcome to that development. Wouldn't that be the case?
Well, I think that I leave it for the American colleagues, friends here around the table to give a better insight on the US legislation, but perhaps to give a little insight of the EU perspective here. In EU, before the GDPR, we did have a data protection legislation in place. It was the 1995 directive, which left a lot of more flexibility for the member states compared to what GDPR does. And then with the development of technology, it became more important to have a more consistent rules which would be applied throughout the EU. So this is when we started with the GDPR negotiations, and one of the leading principles throughout the negotiations was that the level of the protection of personal data should not be lowered in any of the member states. And then we did manage to have a comprehensive piece of legislation, and with the entry into force of the GDPR, it did not only make it more consistent throughout the EU. It also empowered the data subjects, so the people whose data is being processed. So it made them more aware of their rights, and it also gave them better understanding how to actually get their rights executed.
So this is a great cautionary tale from the top regulator in Europe, and that is that GDPR was built in part to respond to the multiplicity of derogations that existed in EU member states under the 1995 directive, which was the prior instrument that guided data protection in Europe. And that is remarkably similar to the circumstance that we find ourselves in now with 17, 18 states, including California. We should note this is one of the major states that has significant comprehensive privacy legislation in the US. The derogations and differences are only increasing as more states pass these standards. And so perhaps the next evolutionary stage for US policy in this regard is national privacy legislation. So 4 weeks ago in Washington, D.C., the IEPP was holding its big annual conference, and I spoke to a bunch of media there, and I told them absolutely no way would we see national privacy legislation in 2024 in the United States. It's an election year. Congress is locked up and can't even fund the government. There is just discord and disharmony everywhere in D.C. No way will they do the hard work of standing up national privacy legislation. And then on the flight home, come to find out that indeed there's a bill. The American Privacy Rights Act, the APRA, some folks are calling it, has been introduced. It is bipartisan, both a Republican and a Democrat sponsoring the bill. It is bicameral, one of the sponsors in the House, one in the Senate. But notably, the two sponsors, Maria Cantwell out of the Senate from Washington State is the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee. Cathy McMorris Rodgers from the House of Representatives is the chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. They are the two committees of jurisdiction, and they are the leaders that you would want to introduce the bill. There was radio silence prior to the introduction of this discussion draft. And since the discussion draft has launched, there have been infographics and executive summaries and major segments on CNN. And we're now up to 2 hearings, one in the House, one in the Senate that occurred yesterday. We understand there's going to be a markup sometime soon. Ruby, what is happening? Might we be seeing national privacy legislation in the US? How are you assessing this circumstance?
With very tired eyes.
Very tight, yes, I know, we're all exhausted.
Honestly, it's like, you know, with these wide margins and the numbered pages, it could roll out like an ancient scroll. I did read the whole thing, and I am thrilled that there's finally some cross the aisle collaboration from both sides of Congress on it, because we haven't really seen that very well to date. So that's a plus. And preemption, there's some, it's quirky, but there's some decent preemption in there. And let me tell you, a national law will not work if we can't preempt this hodgepodge patchwork of state laws. What's the purpose? I mean, setting a low bar isn't helpful at all. So we have to get our hands around preemption, and so I'm grateful that there's some of that in there. But you know, this is still a first draft, and there's a lot in there that needs to be, in my opinion, modified for practicality and for other things, and just sort of clean up and understanding and such. So I think look at it as a first draft. I'm hopeful that something will happen. I'm sad that it didn't try to encompass the hodgepodge of state data breach notification laws, which to me seems like a much easier pill to swallow. They're not that different, but no, they just figured that's already there. Why take that on too, which is unfortunate. But I think it has promise. I don't think it's going to happen this year at all. And if we get traction on anything sooner, I think it's going to be more sensitive data, you know, very particular bills like improving kids' privacy or biometrics or, you know, something, health, you know, gaps, things like that.
Okay, let's capture a couple of things. And for those in the room not deep in this, preemption in the APRA is the idea that state level law would be preempted so that those laws become ineffective and national privacy law reigns supreme, is the national standard. Tremendously powerful. The other thing that I think is notable here is that this is a political compromise bill. There are 2 or 3 major issues that hung up the last major bill that we saw in Congress, the ADPPA, And those were preemption, and we do have a negotiated result there, and the private cause of action, the ability for individual citizens to bring a lawsuit. Within the APRA, there is a limited private cause of action. You have to actually show harm, which is difficult in privacy cases. There's the ability for state AGs and for the Federal Trade Commission to enforce. But I would perhaps be a little less cynical than Ruby about passage. I actually think that there's a lot going on here. And one of the things for me that's compelling is that it doesn't make sense for these political leaders to introduce this bill this year unless they thought it could get across the finish line. Why would they waste the time? Why would they waste the energy and the political capital to even introduce it? So there's just a lot of indicators out there, including just last week in the aid bill for Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan was tossed in the TikTok sale order, the TikTok ban as it's popularly called in the marketplace, as well as the foreign adversary data transfer restrictions. Those were sort of tucked in and signed by Biden last week. So a lot going on there. We're gonna play our game again because we're in an interesting moment. So come on, audience, help me out. This time it's US privacy legislation, and the APRA is on deck. Might we see passage in 2024? I'm gonna make a bold prediction. I'm saying,
Do a cross fingers.
wait, cross fingers. She's hedging. Wow, so many cynics in the room. Caitlin Fennessy, you're with the IAPP. Why is your thumb not up? All right, 2025. Might we see it? After the election, who knows what the political environment. 2026, national privacy legislation in the United States. 2027, okay, I think, wait, Anu said no, never? It's not happening, Anu? You haven't said yes yet?
I give you up until 2028. Then you would actually do better than we did in EU, because it took altogether 6 years from us to put together the GDPR. So
Okay,
I would give you 5 years.
Got it, okay. So that's a long way away still. That's a very long way away. Okay, we are headed towards the end of our panel, but I want to capture one last issue. And Emma, I'm going to ask for your help with this. We've covered AI governance really well. We've covered privacy in the US, I think, pretty well. But there's an enormous amount of regulatory activity happening. Some have called it, in Europe at least, the blue wall. Yeah. And so we see, yes, the GDPR. And I love how you say GDPR, by the way. It's fantastic. We have the EU AI Act, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, the Data Act, the Data Governance Act, e-privacy, reg, and perhaps directive. They're still out there. There are so many digital policy initiatives that are emerging. Talk to us a little bit about that blue wall and the multiplicity of digital risk issues that an organization like OpenAI has to deal with, and how you're tackling that, because there is such a complex world out there.
So each of these, the list you had there, right? Though each of those pieces of legislation, I always say, has its place and purpose. And it's hard. It's really hard for the large organizations and, of course, the smaller ones. And so for us, you know, go back to what I said before in terms of who we are and our mindset at the beginning, you know, as a research lab, I think, you know, we've had the advantage because we look at things, you know, we're able to look at things from a holistic and global perspective, and it's that mindset from a research perspective that's been helpful. Not everyone has that, I understand that. But the wow, as I call it, the ways of working, is important as an organization. And, you know, I'm very lucky to be able to work with those teams that I mentioned earlier, you know, those red teamers, those preparedness teams, all of those excellent teams that are there. But again, not everyone has that, and it's very, very hard. What I always say, though, is go back to basics. Context is king. And so for any you know, organization, when you're looking at how do you approach this, how do you tackle this, always go back to what does it mean for you? What are you doing each day? How are you actually using those tools? Have you really dug into what that actually means? And going back to basics is really, really important, and I always say that. And that's what helps create the wow for your organization, I think. And you can also draw on what already exists. I'm a big believer in recycling in a lot of different ways. And I think that's one of the things that the others have mentioned in terms of looking at GDPR. There's so much work that was done and so many great things that have come out of that. I always keep talking about privacy by design. It's not a theoretical thing. It's actually a thing. It's actually something you can grasp and use for your benefit, for the organization's benefit. And I think using that muscle memory, which it is, your DPIAs, your analysis that's done, you can use that certainly going forward. So look, it's hard. It is hard for every organization, but context is king, I would say. See exactly how you and your organization are actually utilizing that. Look at your team, broader than your privacy team or your engineering team. It's about everyone together. That's the wow that makes it happen. And yes, planning ahead is hard, but it's necessary. And recycling, where you can. Use that muscle memory from other areas. And other parts of the business, by the way, who may not be in legal, for example. Engineers are my best friends. We sit beside each other, we go for lunch together, it's fantastic. But their mindset and how they have been trained, you can utilize that in your own practice.
Fantastic.
So I think that's important.
What a wonderful point for us to leave on. I want to capture a couple of things. We heard that principles matter. Look to the principles and values of your own organization. Emma just gave us a really wonderful call to consider the user, consider the person using the technology. How is this going to be used and what is their experience? And before you get to these legislative and policy tools, before you get to governance and frameworks and controls, start from a place that is deeply human. And I think that's tremendously powerful. We have an enormously complex digital risk environment that we exist in our broader digital economy. One of the things that gives me hope and tells me that we're going to be okay, that these technologies that we are adopting today are actually going to serve our purposes, is that there are tremendous leaders like the women on our stage today who are helping to ensure that these tools serve our humanity. So I'd hope you join me in thanking them for this great panel. Thank you.